Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to, you've guessed it, an impromptu video. How are you all doing? I hope everybody's well. I hope everybody's feeling fine and enjoying the weekend hitherto. I am. Thank you very much for asking. It's kind of suddenly arrived the weekend. I ain't gonna partake in the whole isn't time speeding up, because it clearly is. That's not the point, but when it does, it's like you just, honestly, you know, my parents were here for a couple of days to visit, and it seems like, I don't know, like they weren't even really here. They were, but they weren't, if you know what I mean. Just flown by, literally. But anyway, hey ho, we can continue to talk about that another time. But here we are outside a church just outside Boscombe, so in between Boscombe, the borough of Boscombe, and where Bournemouth town centre, if you like, begins, Lansdowne, called St Swithin's. And as you can see, it's a beautiful specimen, and of course on display are all those sorts of features that we talk about. I'm just going to take a little walk around here, but I'll just show you, for example, these lovely buttresses, you know, to hold up, what, a story and a half, 2 max. But anyway, we've gone through that. As you can see there in the windows, you have the, what they call the tracery around the edges, to give it some sort of decorative appeal and all the rest of it. Can also, obviously, and it does also have a practical element if you've got windows in there, that is. And you have what's called the mullions, which are the beams or bits that separate the windows, and again, their purpose is multifold. It's not just decorative, but it's also to do with strengthening that part of the construction, which in my opinion wasn't there originally. So these buildings here, I don't believe had any windows in them at all. This, just like many old buildings, they've been put in after the fact, whatever that fact is, because everything else has been raised. So you would have had to have sorted all this out here first, before you then, once you've restored it, decide where the windows go. You see it in loads of buildings throughout any big city and town, where you have this phenomena that I keep talking about, where stairs connect the building to the road, and the stairs kind of lead you up. So you're not even really in the first, well, not even really in the ground floor. But it's classed as a ground floor in today's day, as it were. But they have all been revamped, those buildings, so that we could use them. But you'll then see the windows are all in perfect sort of symmetry and perfect height away from the ground. But if the ground has been added, or levelled, or whatever you want to call it, because everything's raised, then obviously the windows and everything else would have been adapted to be the right height to that perceived ground level. Waffling on a little bit there, but you know what I'm trying to say. And the thing is, there is no longer, in my view, a discussion to be had about whether or not these buildings show evidence of raised ground levels, for example, and all the rest of it. We know they do, because it's everywhere. Even churches in the middle of fields on the edges of villages have ground level up. And if you walk around them, you'll find always on one of them, somewhere around the building, a set of stairs that takes you down into a basement side entrance. Right? This has all been added. This would have been pulled away, this earth, because all this, right? Again, the stairs have been put to this height to fit the ground that's been added, and thus the door would have been levelled to the right height. For us to gain access, they would have had to then level the floor at the bottom of those stairs, so that makes a good basement level, if you like. But I can tell you now, that goes even deeper down, way deeper. Right? But that's not the conversation, I don't believe, that one should be having anymore about these buildings. And whether people would like to speculate on who's responsible for them and what regions this architecture may or may not have stemmed from. You know, at the end of the day, that is just pure speculation. And I am not criticising anybody by saying that, by the way. I have respect for everybody that researches these sorts of topics, as long as, of course, their intentions are the right ones. And I'm not saying making money off doing that sort of research is a wrong intention, by the way. That's not what I mean either. I'm not monetized, for example, so I don't have any financial skin in the game, as it were. So for me, I can kind of say what's on my mind in that sense. So I understand also the balancing act. I get it. But then allow people like me who are purely independent to then say it as it is. And I'll say it as it is, right? We do not know who built these. These are before a time, or in a time, if we're to believe. This thing here, by the way, I'm going to bounce in and out here and go off on tangents, so do excuse me, but hopefully I'll get all the information out that I want. This building here was founded, that old chestnut, in 1871, right? When you go behind that cladding, you find brick. That's point number one, right? Most of these buildings, if not all of them, have a brick inner core housing, if you like, inner layer, right? And then you had the cladding on the outside. Pretty much how we build today. The difference is we don't use bricks as the inner core anymore. We now use breeze blocks and stuff like that. It's cheaper, it's lighter, easier to maneuver around, and I'll get to that in a minute, right? But this here was supposed to have been founded in 1871. Now, anybody at all can just have a look at the official history books, look at inventions, look at whatever you want to look at that refers to that period in our era as humans on this earth, and tell me how that would have been possible, right? Clearly this was built at a time when, according to our books, it shouldn't be buildable, because they're here, they stood here, right? But there's one glaring obvious thing that I've overlooked or not really homed in on enough, and I should have done. I'll get to the other side of the road here, and that's kind of I'm sort of connecting this up with my sort of main topic that I like to look at and I have been invested in emotionally and energetically and all the rest of it for many years now, and that is the nature of our realm, right? People with no imagination just call people like me a flat earther or whatever, for example, because I question things, right? But here's the thing, and this is the point I'm going to get to, and that'll make sense in a minute why I said that. Right. Flat earth measurements, the measurements that we require to measure longitude and latitude, right? They require a horizontal baseline before you even can calculate a radius to then fudge the numbers and come up with a ball, right? So in every instance, the measurements have to be with respect to a flat, horizontal, level plane. They are planar, right? Well, if you transfer that logic to the old world, or hidden history as I like to call it, right? No matter what you say about who may or may not have built them, when the materials may have been produced or not produced, to then explain whether or not they would have been accessible or not, and all the rest of it. Fact of the matter is, without logistics, none of this is possible. Right, now I'm going to put out another video in the next day or two to go into more the topic of logistics itself. It might be a bit dry, but I'm going to go into it. It'll be a 5 or 10 minute maybe maximum video, and I'm just going to highlight some points of what actually logistics entails. And if anybody thinks it's just delivering packages, they're on the absolute wrong steamboat, as the Germans would say, right? That is not logistics. That's just transportation and delivery service. Logistics covers so much, including the planning of these buildings, right? And including creating access roads to then get to them, the area that you want to build on, etc., etc. It's a huge undertaking, right? And when you bear in mind that in a small town like Bournemouth, which was way smaller 100 years ago, population-wise, at least according to the sensors, right? There are loads of these buildings dotted around Bournemouth. Like I said last time, when I was in Boscombe a few years ago doing a lot of these videos, I counted in a quarter to half a mile radius about 22 of these types of buildings. Some of them with cladding on, visible like now. Some of them with cladding off, where the red brick was exposed. Some of them where the bricks were a slightly different colour even. But nevertheless, the same thing, if you get my drift, right? But anyway, right, so what I'm saying with that is, whatever we want to talk about in terms of, this is just my opinion, by the way, everybody can do what the hell they want, right? But I'm also entitled to my opinion. And I also don't want to, when I have conversations with people, have them think that I'm on that sort of bandwagon of Tartaria or otherwise, because I most definitely am not. Just like when I talk about the Earth, I don't subscribe to domes and ice walls, because for the simple reason, until it's validated, I see that as a nice idea and speculation, but that is it. What you can say though, however, this is my personal opinion, I like to repeat, is that Earth is measured flat, always. Always. Right? Everything is taken in respect to a flat, horizontal, planar baseline. Right? Well, the same with these buildings. No matter what angle you come from, logistics would have had to have played a part. Not perhaps, had to. And in 1871, when all these buildings were popping up all around the country, never mind all the ones that have been destroyed since, through mysterious fires and civil unrest and Nazi bombs that went stray when they were flying back to Germany but decided to drop some bombs on Bournemouth. Not an industrial city at all, nothing here to bomb, but hey ho, funny that certain buildings got hit here. So all I'm saying to that is that, you know, the logistics of these buildings are something you cannot get around. You cannot. You could speculate and say, well, maybe they were all giants. Maybe we had levitation. Maybe all the tech that we eventually perceived as being invented was already around. Blah, de, blah, de, blah. Yeah, that could all be. But whatever it all is, fact is, you need logistics. Feel free, please, to look up logistics as a general term and see what you get. It's layers and layers and layers. It's a proper onion. You can peel back one layer and it leads to another, right? It's key. From project management all the way to transportation, storage, you know, all that stuff. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that point because, you know, the same with the shape of the Earth. To simply say someone's a conspiracy theorist, or to simply say someone's a flat earther and basically trying to mock them with that phrase, right? Yeah, is wrong, because I'm not going around preaching flat Earth. I'm pointing out to people that we measure the Earth flat. That's just how we do it. That's how we navigate, etc., etc., etc. You know, if you have a map that indicates 100 square miles, those miles looking down on that map are flat. They're flat. They're linear. Regardless of whether below that distance, looking at it from above, there are hills and valleys, the distance itself, the mileage, is measured in a linear fashion. Right? And any mountains or hills or valleys are depicted with contour lines, and there'll be a little number next to it telling you how high or low it is with regard to sea level. And the same goes with this, slightly different in a sense, obviously, but what I'm saying is, without the logistical aspect, none of this is ever possible. Ever. Right? Like I say, I'm going to, you know, release or publish, put out, whatever, a slightly more dry video just to list some facts about logistics, and the importance of them, and not just the importance of them, but the key, the keystone-esque role that logistics have in the whole construction process. Without logistics, you don't construct. And I'm not talking about setting up a tent in your garden. So anyway, yeah, I just thought I would highlight that because it was on my mind, and I thought, well, that's a good segue to connect the two, because just like with flat Earth, it's not about flat earthers being conspiracy theories. There might be some amongst them, of course. I can only speak for myself. But genuinely speaking, if I point out to people that the Earth is measured flat on a daily basis, well, at the end of the day, there's nothing anybody can do about that because it's a simple fact. Now, how people deal with that information, whether they want to mock you, ridicule you, unfriend you, all that sort of stuff, attack you verbally or otherwise, personally and everything else, well, that is their problem. Because I'm cool with it, right? You know, and I should have paid more attention when I was in Scouts, because I used to love map reading. I used the compass all the time, and it was always 2D. It was horizontal. It was, yeah. It just blows my mind that I didn't put more effort into following up on that. Because you're trying to compute how does flat measurements then work on a ball, and then your brain somewhere tells you, well, because it's a huge ball, that'll be it then, because we're on a ball, because we've been told, because that's what we learned at school, right? So all those flat measurements you compute, and you kind of merge it with the ball, and that's what a lot of people who oppose this, not theory but fact, they try and say things like that. Well, we measure we do measure the Earth flat, but only locally. What a ridiculous thing to say. That's somebody not wanting to give up on their worldview. That's what that is. And it's not about worldviews, it's about just looking at the facts. The facts are we measure Earth flat for everything we do. Building, everything. Everything has to be done perpendicular to the horizontal, 90 degrees. Degrees are formed by angles. Angles are two straight lines meeting at a vertex. Not a diagonal line up to the sky and a curved line as your baseline. No, that's not an angle. Angles are two straight lines. And they are the measurements you have to take before you even consider turning all that into ball maths. Right? That all comes later, but in its originality, they are flat Earth measurements. Always and forever. Always have been, always will be. Right? Well, like I said, without wanting to repeat myself, but the same goes for these beauties. Right? They've had a lot of work done to them as well and all that. And you see a lot of these things going on with these buildings where the outside sometimes almost looks older than the bit it's attached to. So if you look at this one here, for example, you've got this bit of the building that's been clearly added to that bit of the building. But on some buildings, this bit looks older than that bit. And in my opinion, that's just part of the whole deception. Just like adding these buildings here on the side, right? But like I said, without logistics, none of this works, because all this that we're walking on, by the way, is all raised, which means this lot here, trees, etc., won't have been planted until this ground was here. And I know this is all raised because when you go across the street, all the houses are half submerged, and like I said, they've got the basement side entrance in this church, which you'll find in every church. Anyway, there you go. Before I repeat myself for a 20th time, I shall leave that there. It's a lovely day today. It's not boiling, but it's warm. I've just taken a little sort of walk, kept it a little bit sort of, nice and local. Yeah, and I just wanted to share those thoughts with you. Anyway, like I said, thank you for looking in, as always. I always appreciate that. I'm just grateful that people even get my videos, to be honest with you. I know I'm shadow banned, and the real people are. And I'll just leave that there. But on that note, I'll see you all soon. Some of you much, much sooner. Until then, take it all, every single one of you, easy, and ta-ta for now.